name of somebody who has changed their name, there's that in the name of that. So that there's a split, the fragmentation of first life and second life. There's a death from the subject. And how do we bridge that, and why do we bridge that, and what are the tools, the narrative tools? The trans diagnosis itself is narrative based. So telling stories is crucial to making sense of trans. Another very current narrative that we have, especially from parents of trans people, is that this one: I lost a sad, hushed, and defined daughter, but I gained a son who is happy, strong, and willing to live. So this again creates a split in a way of an unattainability of the former self, right, and the transitioning body. This is from an association of parents of trans people in Brazil. And also, if we take a look at autobiographies, especially here in the US, Conundrum is one of the first ones, written by Jen Morris, a trans woman, in 1974. This was highlighted by Sandy Stone, and this is just a quote from her book. I went to say goodbye to myself in the mirror. We would never meet again, and I wanted to give that other self a long lost look in the eye and a wink for good luck. And it's very common in autobiographies to see that moment, especially before surgery, which is a moment of saying goodbye to a former self. It's a moment, and it's very symbolic that that happens in a hospital, a place for both death and birth, right? So this is constantly being rearranged as tropes for trans narratives. In analyzing trans narratives and autobiography here in the US, we have the research from Jay Prosser. I wanted to read a little bit of how he makes sense of the split. So autobiography brings into relief the split of the transsexual life. I was a woman, I write as a man. How to join the split, how to create a coherent subject, precisely through narrative, over the course of the recounting, the narrative continuity, the trajectory of autobiography, tracing the story of a single self, premises like the transsexual transition itself, to rejoin the split into a single connected life. And this is for sure not my project. My project, I just brought this as an oppositional theory. My project is more aligned with staying with the trobo and not really creating a precisely coherent and continued sense of self in storytelling and in trans self-representation. Sorry. So, okay. So this is. And I'll watch me suck at this. No, I want to put it in the whole.
Command L, I think.
Okay. Does that work? Yeah. Thank you. So that's so tiny.
But then you can zoom in maybe with your fingers,
Does this work?
That's not.
Doesn't. See, that's how bad I am.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Zoom in.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so this is a story that I'm going to share with you from that chapter. It's a personal story, true story, that happened in 2015. It's the last time I saw my grandfather. And I think hopefully that will illuminate some of those theoretical points I'm trying to bring up. So I still had been. 2 nurses carried him from the bathroom into the hospital room. Almost 3 years had passed since we had last seen each other. He was almost completely deaf, and his lungs were failing, but his mind was still sharp. Since he would clearly die soon, my mom asked me to go with her for a final visit. Good afternoon. Awkward formalities saturated the air. After all, nobody should have to entertain strangers on their deathbed. Who is he? And there's the he. My mom was taken aback. She could never have imagined he wouldn't recognize his own granddaughter sitting right in front of him. Because, and so she says, but Dad, what do you mean? A few days before, she had brought a computer to the hospital so he and my sister could Skype. Even though they had rarely spoken for the past 15 years, my grandpa remembered that she was a professor of Portuguese in either Germany or France, and he even asked her about those generic boyfriends he had seen in pictures. Grandpa always had a sharp mind. If he was able to remember her, of course he would remember me. But now it was as if his gaze was presenting a different version of me to my mom. Before that moment, she had never stopped seeing me as her daughter, or seeing her daughter in me. She had been visually editing the changes in my body with her self-induced myopia, an efficient testosterone blocker. It's Lena. It's Lena, and so this went on forever. Lena, and it's back and forth. Yes, it's me, Lena. So because his lungs were weak, he kept spelling the letters repeatedly with his lips without vocalizing them. This communication, more visual than audible, exaggerated the name, as if trying to make up for the time since Lena had fallen out of use. Lena. But not even this repeated chorus in various modalities was enough to summon my former self. He simply could not see her, me. The irony is that it really was Lena, or I really was Lena, who came to visit. To spare him of the discomfort that my masculinity would bring, that day I had transformed into a walking tribute to her. I brought a smooth chin and a composition of exaggeratedly restrained and delicate gestures. The only item that didn't belong to her was the pair of masculine dress shoes. I didn't have any other. I even found and put on some old clothes from before transitioning. It was an allegory, a true homage to my former self. Even so, I couldn't get him to recognize us. I was beyond the point of no return. But there was still hope. There was no need for anyone to save me. I would be the hero of my own story. Where is it? I would rescue the damsel I had once been, using the weapon that had been failing me the most, my driver's license. Here, Grandpa. Confident, I took advantage of that moment and painted an acceptable image of myself in hopes to dilute the precarious masculinity that was staining his sight. But it was hard to sustain a high-pitched feminine voice that was also loud enough to overcome his hearing impairment. So I said, I came on a bus from Florianopolis just to visit you, Grandpa. I'm in a PhD program, you know. Remember, you're proud of me, or whatever. So after carefully analyzing my ID, he gave my mom his verdict. It's the same name, and this just blew my mind. It's so surreal. Apparently, he thought his granddaughter had sent a guy named like her to visit him on her behalf. And I was like, okay. My mom tried desperately to help. Why don't you introduce yourself with your new name, she asked. To which I replied, but we already know each other. Besides, I don't think he's looking for new friendships. He's about to die. So he was dying right in front of me, but I had apparently died before him. Nonetheless, I refused to be resurrected as a newborn, because deep inside, I knew what I still had been. And this is this I still had been is in Portuguese, eu ainda fui is a contradiction. You wouldn't use the words like that. So I'm trying to bring that impossibility of temporality and verbal conjugations. And also in Portuguese, it's very unfortunate that in Portuguese we gender so many words, and Spanish too, right? But that was actually very good for my trying to bring a female gendered and a masculine gendered in the same sentence, which I can't do in English. So that is lost in trans, and then now lost in translation.
You have the lost in trans and translation.
Yeah.
You get a lot of mileage out of it.
Yeah. So I still had been that child who repeatedly listened to his same old puns and wordplays. Time and again, she pretended to laugh, as if hearing them for the first time. So he used to say, ninho de mafagafos, cheio de mafagafinhos, which is a wordplay, Leandro e Leopardo. Yeah. And this is a reference to Vovó Mafalda, which is a very queer character. Yeah, that was very inspiring, I guess. So I had still been that little girl who rode my bike in his backyard every Saturday morning, making pit stops by the caged window through which Grandma would feed her pieces of bread with homemade guava jelly. And this play with my and her, and my and her is how I try to mend that gendered the way I could gender things in Portuguese and can't in English. So I still had been that kid that startled them when I kicked her ball against the glass window that framed the goal for my lonely soccer matches. I still had been that little brat who subverted her grandma's prayer every night, said amen, amen, hey woman. So this is a very lucky translation moment, because in Portuguese what I actually said was amém, amém, and I said amendoim, which is peanut. So this is it's a good translation moment. So I still had been that dyke who took them grocery shopping every week and displayed her strength by carrying all the bags at once. I still had been that creature who sat through televised mass between her work and school. I don't know if you have this here. My grandpa, when they were too old to drive, every 5 o'clock they would sit down and put televised mass. And then there was this moment when my grandpa would fill 3 glasses with water and put it in the top of the television so it would be made holy.
Oh my God.
So it's a technology, it's a Brazilian technology. So Lord Jesus Christ turned this water holy as well as the waters of those watching our show. And I even drank her water made holy by television and got several possibly related UTIs. How was it possible for him to look at me and not see her? How ironic. While most trans people want their families to recognize their names and genders, I wallow in necropolitics and insist in resuscitating the dead name, my other who lives in the right side of the mirror. That mysteriously missing child from parents who grieve a lost daughter and celebrate gaining son. I now ended up like a zombie, a living dead entity. And this in Portuguese, living dead would be morto vivo. It's not gonna happen. It's not going to go. Yeah, so living dead is both gendered words in Portuguese, so I was able to bring that split in a one word, but still insisting on the split, right? So insisting that all of this was but a misunderstanding caused by my grandpa's poor hearing, my mom tried to take control of the situation. So she grabbed a piece of paper and she actually wrote down, "This is Lina, my daughter, your granddaughter, she is different." So he read it carefully, but the confusion wouldn't leave his face. He knew the words and recognized the sentences, but the content didn't correspond to the circumstances. So they started again, Lina, Lina. And the second act to the ode to Lina was interrupted by a knock on the door, and panic flowed between my mom and I. It's Lina there, Lina, Lina. So as a side effect of hormonal therapy, I stopped getting invited to family gatherings. So we both feared who could be behind that door. Hi Anna, hi João. But it was only João, a distant and absent cousin that sometimes showed up for Christmas when I was a child. Since my existence was now conditional on others' perceptions, I took in a responsive identity. Hello, I'm João. He came to shake my hand. Then my mom intervened, said, "Don't you remember Lina?" And then he kissed me like he greeted a woman. "Oh, sure. Hi, Lina." We all sat down, hoping that this new configuration would change the course of the visit. But Grandpa interrupted the conversation various times to introduce me to João, who knew me, to which my mom promptly responded by heavy-handedly changing subjects. So all the time my grandpa was trying to introduce me to my cousin. "Oh, do you know him? He has the same name." And I was just like, I cannot, I quit. So, and my mom was like, "Oh, so what are you having for Christmas, for dinner?" It was just really messy. So unable to participate in the conversation, I turned into an incoherent composition of flesh, with no corresponding history, face, or name. Stuck in the margins of that interaction, I started meticulously observing my grandpa. And this is João telling a joke. Let me tell you a joke. I noticed that his body had also transformed itself abruptly. His limbs and fingers were so slim and elongated, he looked like a Byzantine painting come to life. And then João goes on. "Do you know how cups greet people? Pleased to meet you." And I laugh. His gums had retracted so much, he was left with a skeleton smile, the color and flexidity of his skin and his voice's tone, all of it so suddenly different, but no matter how severe the changes in his body were, his identity would not be questioned. Just like it didn't matter how absent João had been, he would always be recognizable. After a while, João left, and my mom went to the cafeteria. An unsettling silence crystallized as I was left alone with Grandpa. After a few minutes, he decided to give me a piece of advice. Don't ever grow old. There's no dignity to it. It's humiliating. I was unexpectedly able to relate to his words. Despite inhabiting a different temporality, where even the verbal conjugations fail, I could relate to that feeling, in a reality where the present doesn't reflect the past, and the future is not to be thought about. The idea that I would not live long enough to grow old was familiar and even comforting. His last words buried our common past one and for all, and welcomed me to the world of men. He said, "Nice shoes." But this inheritance I refused. All right. Great.
Excellent. Christina, you have quite your job cut up for you. You don't feel obliged to make extensive comments. We can open it up whenever you want.
After the talent, it's so difficult for us who work only with words. First of all, I would like to thank Sonia Alves and Ana Maria Ospina and Jacob for organizing this panel, as well as Ìris, Priscila, Laura, and Dino for their texts they sent me before, so I could read. And this last week I was in a Fulbright seminar and met some other Brazilian scholars that are in the US for the semester, and we were talking about the sadness and depression of every time we open the news about Brazil. Every day is a new deception with this government issue, with this government and the coup, but also with groups of middle class and religious fundamentalists that have raised a very conservative discourse there. But at the same time, like this panel showed us, it's possible to see new resistance movements, new ways in which peasants, women, trans, and LGBT people are organizing or simply standing up for their rights and living against the conservative wave that is going on. Some questions and reflections spring from the presentations we just listened to, and I know we cannot just answer all of them, but I will bring them anyway. Why gender and sexuality seems to be so strategic for the right and for the left? Conservative parties and movements are investing in bills and propositions against abortion, against women equality, and they make racist, homophobic, and transphobic remarks in their social media, in their speeches, and in the other side, street protests and even social media campaigns in these topics seems to take shape, to improve, to grow. Another question is the parties, unions, and other traditional political institutions seem to have noticed the appeal of these themes, some more than others, but we begin to see their attempts to address these issues in their programs, in their organogram also, to have women or LGBT department of the party. This comes from the 80s, but now it seems that they are very engaged in it. And in their slogans too. At the same time, this kind of appropriation runs against the will of autonomy of some of these movements and new political subjects, as Ìris and Laura spoke. But they also reflect another configuration of political and labor organizations where women, LGBT, trans people, black and indigenous people are being progressively acknowledged as they have this social support. And one third question, very difficult for all people in Brazil, I think, is why it's so difficult for the opposition to the coup to unify. Of course, as a historian, I know this is a very old and fundamental history. All know that the left-wing people in Brazil only unify in the jail. That's something we say all the time, ever since I know. But at this moment, perhaps it would be a very good moment before we go to the jail to try to make possible some kind of strategic union, thinking about next year's election. So I let you with these questions, and you don't have to answer them, but it was kind of the reflection I could do about this, and I think it's, and thank you for sharing all these incredible texts, and especially also this art. And thank you so much.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we take like maybe 3 questions, comments, and then go back to the speakers and have them answer in reverse order from how it's presented. So questions, comments, or yeah, please.
Yes, my question is, well, so I'm Ìris. I'm from Rio, and I work here at Minas in the language department. I'm the director of Spanish and Portuguese. My question is sort of a transnational question here in the US and there, that I've been trying to understand, and maybe given what you said before, I'd like to hear your comments about it. I would like to understand a little bit better the nature of manipulation. Because what we see both in Brazil and here is that the right-wing parties, they are excellent at the manipulating discourse. Right? So they are doing a great job, right? So in Brazil, it's such a wonderful job that things are worse than they've ever been for the past 30 years, right? And people think that the problem is that, and those are the words by Eliane Brum a couple of weeks ago in her column, people think that the problems are in the museums, right? So the whole country is falling apart, and the problem of the country falling apart is because there is something in a specific museum in Porto Alegre, right? So that's it. So how can you convince so many people in society, right, in a country that's falling apart, that the problem is coming from a museum, right? But most of those people have never visited a museum, and they have never been in a museum, right? So, and it goes back to one of the final comments, which I believe that it may have to do with the fact that one side is focusing on maybe proposing or defending something, and the other side is just focusing on finding an enemy. And I see that being done here in the US. I mean, people, the taxes, what about taxes? The important thing, so you want to unify people or the right-wing folks, you just have to say 2 words, abortion and gay rights, and boom, everybody's unified against something, right? And then why isn't the other side also using some of this? I mean, what are the strategies? And you guys that are studying these social movements, what are the strategies that you? Yeah, there's exactly there's the one side is only interested in the money, maybe, right? But the question is, what you've been studying? Have you found any common grounds on the way that people are being manipulated, right, from the social movements to? So what can you tell us about the nature of the manipulation that's going on in Brazil? And I think it will help us understand the nature of the manipulation here in the U.S. as well. That, as Eliane Brum said, the entire an important part of the country thinks that the problem now is one museum exhibition.
Totally. Yes, thank you.
Hi.
Juliana.
Hi all, my name is Juliana. I'm a first year student from sociology and I'm out from Brazil. I will wait to ask my questions because I was trying to put together. But first, I want to say thank you very much for your work. Thank you. I don't have a questions for you because it was a kind of little bromance and I need to go home and this kind of things. But thank you, and also thank you for I know that I don't know if who is are not from Brazil and maybe do not know what the reality of the formal education in Brazil, but normally you have writing for inside the academia in a very perspective that excludes huge part of the population, especially the work class, especially the black people who are more than 50% of the country. And one of the things that a lot of social movements are trying to do is make that people inside the academia be concerned to write for everybody. And your concern to use these different medias, in your work, it's fantastic. Thank you very much. I have questions, I think, that's more focused for Laura and for Ìris. How the race has affected your analysis about self-defense? And I'm asking this because we have to remember that you only can talk in democracy in Brazil since the 80s if you ignore the black people, if you ignore the genocide that is happening there. So it's the only way we talk about democracy. And I'm asking because since Aurelia Gonzalez is a huge person in Brazil that organized a lot of protests at that time, even with the protests that are very with children, with women in the front of the protest, if the color of these people was a little darker, the reaction of the police was completely violent, and this has been the story. So how it's very different when, for example, we have a protest when you have most white people, or most, the police is more be careful, and I'm really interested to see how, because how you're thinking the self-defense in the middle of this. We have the experience of the Feminismo Capacidade do Diversa and the Diversa that are two, actually it's the same thing that are called here. But one of the things, for example, that was discussed at that time was how the woman could do the protection, and we decided this protest was another. But in the events and kind of things, but at the same time it was the war of the black woman bodies in this kind of protections. Just remember that the black women's march in 2015, was a huge, was one of the biggest feminist women's protests in Brazil for many years. Was this protest finished because a guy in a country where people are not allowed to use guns shot the woman with a gun, fire gun. Is this the term, fire gun? Fire. Yeah, and so I'm very curious to see how do you think this self-defense in this case is very curious. I also think that I know your work so you know that I like your work. Thank you. And Ìris, my question for you is more how are you rating the no parties and these ideas of new feminism? Yeah, it's because I know I confess that I have a little difficulty to this concept of new feminist, because I think that makes a lot of sense for a part of the feminist if you use in Brazil. But for example, if you look for how the ancestrality is mobilized for a huge part of movements, and I think it's a little different, and like this I'm also talking about especially Black women movements, and being part of these movements, they're inside of parties, especially inside of workers' party. And this is like something that people are discussing, discussing another word, right? Sorry. Sorry guys, just don't hear. So we have like these tendencies to be against of like these young people to be against with some kind of traditional institutions, like the political parties, but at the same time you have these mixed ideas in some places. So in your work, are you working with this? If yes, how are you approaching these programmatics? What data do you have? It's also very interesting. And I didn't think how, like, I thought about Lino, but all the works were amazing. Still, I don't have questions for you, but you know that I really, really appreciate your work. Thank you all. Thank you.
One more?
Yeah. I'm sorry to miss everybody else's papers, but I love the way how you were disrupting the notion of a fixed subject. And I was just reading from a class tomorrow how in the LGBTQ movement, in one of his pieces, was arguing that the movement was trans from the beginning, so it is an issue including trans in. So when you work with this destabilized subject, how does that work play out? Theoretically, but much more, you were talking about with your community, how does that work out with the LGBTQ movement, which may, at this moment of precarity, trying to, well, actually it's a two-part question, is that movement in this moment of precarity trying to sort of assert a certain kind of fixed subjectivity to be able to get rights, in which case the kind of work that you do and the kind of things that are going on in the trans movement, how does that play out theoretically and politically?
Anything else? Yeah, okay.
I just had a really quick question for Ìris and for all panelists. So it really caught my attention when you mentioned the gender ideology, the use of the gender ideology, this sort of narrative, this rhetoric, because it is exactly the same in Colombia. Like the exact same
It's happening in Holland.
Yeah, and it was prominent in the campaign against the referendum for the peace agreement. This idea that an approach towards a peace agreement that included a special consideration for the kind of violence that women suffer in a conflict was a gender ideology, and it was part of a larger agenda to like corrupt children or whatnot. And so I was wondering if you know, if you could speak a little bit about these transnational connections, because we talk a lot about protests in a transnational perspective and then work with activism, but it seems like through language we can make these connections at the right, especially perhaps from the perspective of churches, because it's also prominent in evangelicals, I don't know, evangelical churches. They have such an important role in that particular campaign against their friends. And so I was wondering if you have some insights.
So that was exactly the kind of, but I think we don't want to give the evangelicals too much credit because they deserve quite a bit of the credit for this onslaught. But they have lots of partners in crime, and I think we miss the big picture if we focus just on evangelical Protestants because the church is involved, international capital is involved. And certainly we see it in this country too. So my question was really in the direction of, please, to the extent that you can or want to, in your responses to these other specific questions, speak to the extent to which somebody named Feminist was just called it the ideology of the Inquisition, because they don't want to give up gender to these people, because there is no ideology of gender, right? I mean, it's something that they fabricated. But I think it's really interesting. Anyway, that's one thing. And the other thing I was thinking as you were formulating that was when I first started teaching many decades ago, like in the century before last or something, it feels like. I used to teach about women's mobilization against Pinochet, or the mobilization of gender and the family against what the Unidad Popular project stood for. And I used to, in that lecture to undergraduates always say, so if the left doesn't care about gender for any other reason, or women, or whatever I use at the time was gender, for any other reason, they should care about it, because if you don't care about it, the right will use it against you. And that seems to be exactly what's going on again. That in part, that the left didn't know how to deal with either gender or race or sexuality or trans issues, or the traditional left, not the new left, but the new left or whatever. But it seems like, nobody really knows. The traditional left doesn't really know how to respond to this, and I think movements of the sort that you all were talking about do know. And so if you're so inspired, take a shot at that kind of thing.
Can we make questions too?
So let's start, let's do one round, and then I think we'll do one round of brief responses, and then we'll continue over food. Okay? So the food doesn't get too cold, and so you all don't get too hungry. So let's start with Lino, who started, so we'll go in reverse order. Lino first, then you, then...
No, but I want to make a question.
I have another question.
You can when it's your turn then.
Thank you all for the questions. I'll try to be brief and kind of put them all together. I think one aspect that is worthy of pointing out is that these investments against queerness demonstrate that right-wing or evangelical actually acknowledge the inherent conflictual aspects of identity that validate queerness and the potential threat to social order. So if we think about the social fabric, like as a fabric, right-wing would say that queerness is actually capable of rupturing it. So that makes a very interesting opponent, a very interesting enemy to have that actually validates our power, our threats. As opposed to neoliberalism or left wing, which would assimilate and think of that fabric as ever expanding or elastic and capable of accommodating queerness in their terms. And then, we see this in representation in Brazil, we can look at the soap opera. There's for the first time a trans man in a soap opera in Brazil, and that's huge. And also to speak a little bit about identity strategies. This is a very a representation that relies on identity strategies in the sense that it kind of accommodates the medical discourse, to the narratives of I was born in the wrong body, I was born this way, and kind of ruptures the split that I'm trying to really not suture and exaggerate. So those are I think there's just something to be said about right wings and evangelicals validating of our potential threat. I'm more afraid of the neoliberals. As long as I can self-defend in the street, right? Or as long as I don't leave my house. So it's different threats. I was going to talk a little bit about the booming of the LGBT departments and the LGBT awareness and the need to carve a niche for that it's kind of the politically correct thing to do right now, which is for sure validating and empowering, but sometimes it's just a way of incorporating and without giving space for the actual interventions of trans people or LGBT people, and just naming it is enough at a point.
Tokenism.
Exactly, tokenism. So I could say, at least from my own personal experience, when I got the Fulbright, I know that I got the Fulbright because they needed a first Brazilian trans scholar. I know this for a fact. During my interview on the phone, which is the last stage, my interviewer said to me, after I talked about my whole thesis, my projects, she said to me, thank you so much for your courage. And that is a term from disability studies. This is inspirational porn. This is the term. So there you can kind of like see that Fulbright has been always wanting me to be casted on their webpage as a success case, you know, and they wanted me to send pictures, and they wanted me to be their like person. So you cannot find my picture in the Fulbright website because I was hiding all the time during their pre-departure orientation, where they teach us about personal hygiene because we Brazilians are dirty. Yes, I had a pre-departure orientation about personal hygiene, and I also learned that I should keep one arm of length between me and all U.S. scholars. My first week.
I always do that.
Yeah. My first week.
Preferably 2 or 3, really.
I can see that. The first week in Tucson, it was the trans conference. I was naked in a hot tub with all the scholars. I failed that from the very beginning. So yeah, it's like interesting to see like how they shape it and how that is also used to just reinsure them of that kind of bragging of being able to accommodate, which is a lie. Fulbright has not accommodated for trans people at all, for black trans people at all. I am just capable of being there because of my privilege, just as well as I'm capable of being in a PhD program because I'm white and I'm middle class, upper class. So like that's the kind of erasure that we kind of have to keep a sharp eye on.
You don't know that we made a poster of you that will be widely distributed. First Brazilian trans man to come
just like tear the form over
T-shirts, fundraising T-shirts.
Yeah. So that is for sure something that, to be critical of. So about the political, the identity politics and as a strategy, it has been, of course, a very legitimate, a very historically very potent way of organizing with not only trans community, LGBT, women's movement, and that's how the legal system works. That's how a lot of our ways of exceeding the structures that are already there. That's the way to do it, right? But I think, and to touch the question, who was it that asked about the problems of division? I think how groups divide themselves, and then the right is so good at adjusting the unity to their fronts, right? I think identity strategy actually divides a lot of trans people, and because in Brazil we fight for little crumbs. It's really hard in a place where we don't have resources to actually make everybody happy. If I have a shelter for trans women, cis women will destroy that because they also need shelters. So we're always fighting for like little crumbs that we get, which is a strategy also from right wing and from neoliberalism to give some and let us fight over it, right? But identity strategy has divided trans community, and it's a very colonial force as well because it's very aligned with, in trans cases, with medical discourse, right? So who can have access to these resources? And of course, all of our medical discourse comes from the U.S., where, for instance, travesti is not a thing. We don't have travestis. We have transsexual women, transgendered women, others in the trans female spectrum, genderqueer, but there's no such thing as travesti, and that travesti identity is not a part of medical discourse. So if they don't fit the narrative, which they don't, especially because of genital circumstances, most of them are sex workers and need to have a penis to be able to work, or even just want to keep their penises, they're not eligible for that kind of program. And that just like kind of creates who is trans and who isn't trans, and that just kills it from within. Mm-hmm. So that's why I endorse a more multiple and diverse. That's why I'm into storytelling. I think that's the place for diversity to emerge within a small group. Trans is as an identity, but it has to be able to be more flexible in that sense. And so I think we're stronger. And this is a time to be stronger. I think this is a time to look closely to our community and to fortify its bonds, because as everywhere else, it's not a time for expanding outside. But this is my take on it.
David.
Okay, so firstly, about Jules' question. Most of my knowledge about self-defense actually has come from capoeira, which is like a Brazilian fight, and I think that all the other approach I got to know with self-defense have any relation with the resistance of marginalized people, races in general, like indigenous or black people or any other kind of group that has been systemically excluded from any privilege. And I think that this approach, I think some of, even if there are a lot of black feminists which are within the institutions and which have their practice within the institutions, I think that most of the black feminist movement in Brazil have been always very, how do you say that? They never really trusted how the state could deal, because at the end, if you're dealing with like domestic violence or anything, it's different who can call the police, who can get benefits from any kind of judicial judgment that we have seen that has even if when the woman looks for the institutional justice, they are mostly not succeeded in having their protection. So, and also a very strong moment in Diversas was in that festival we were talking about, was one episode of domestic violence that happened during in the occupation, during the activities of the festival. And in an occupation, you cannot call the police, because if you're like being threatened of being thrown away, of being, you're not going to call the police. So there's no such option. And most of the violence that attack women, human rights defenders in all Latin America, all feminists that were like disappeared, they were mostly actions of the authoritarian state and police. So I think focus in self-defense has a critical perspective within race. I think that like here I've been learning about the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think the focus on police violence and like other approaches to deal with surviving and self-defense are like something that really like not, because we have seen in Brazil through data that the changings on the women affected by domestic violence seems that have been some better rates, if you can say that, but only for white women. Black women have been like more exposed to domestic violence. So I think we are kind of experiencing one moment where we're kind of giving up, putting too much energy in like constructing all these state structures that are now going to be occupied, as I've seen in Peru, in many other countries in Latin America, like women's or public policy institutions that are probably now going to be filled by right-wing, anti-abortion, anti-everything women. Yeah, the woman that is now the chair of the ministries and anti-abortion, even in rape. I mean, she's like, and that happens. It doesn't mean that you have like a structure within the state that you're going to have like positive policies being done by, I mean, the state. And also, I mean, we know that like the police stations are best place ever. And just to answer, I think that the thing about manipulation is that there's a lot of money being put to create this kind of videos, internet. A lot of things are being created, and like we have one person that do like a good job, and other we can't communicate because we don't have enough money to create some systems. And just to Christina, I think that I would say that the biggest problem that can't allow an opposition, an unifying opposition within the left would still be PMDB. Because sometimes I think that PT is still more worried about being allied with PMDB, even after all of that. And we were being beaten in the protests in 2013 within Dilma's government. So I don't think most of the left are not interested in like coming to the streets to fight for the Workers' Party government. So, and one other thing that I would also like to add a question to Priscila on that would be on land reform. And why do you think that
small topic?
Small topic. Why do you think if the Workers' Party had never touched land reform, why do the movements are involved in putting the same party down?
Right. Hello. Obrigada. Thank you. That really is a big question, and Priscila should have more time. But first we're going to go to Ìris, and then we're going to end with you. And then I just wanted to point out to our last two accommodating Brazilian friends that it's almost 7. So if we would appreciate brevity, and then we would appreciate animated conversation over food in W31, which is down the hall. But go ahead.
Okay, so Juliana, thanks for the question. I'm not sure if I understand entirely your question, but I try to avoid using the term new feminism because the term assumes that there is a fixed subject. So I prefer using contemporary feminisms instead of new feminisms or youth or young feminisms. But yeah, it's a very complex question because the intergenerational relations between among feminists in Brazil, you can't deny that there is this difference. But when we put race and gender and sexuality and generation, the things are not black and white. So it's really complicated. And about gender ideology, so many things to talk about gender ideology, but what I would point out is the ways that we used to treat the category of gender politically. Like until a few years ago, we used to think that gender is a true binary and apolitical category. And now I see myself and my feminist community in Brazil trying to reclaim again gender because of all of this misconception about gender around gender ideology. So it is very interesting.
Yeah?
Yes.
You got it.
So I'll try very quickly to address these two questions about why are gender and sexuality so central, and his question also about international, the work of right wing and the manipulation. And I think I'll try to end it in the evangelical church. See if I can do it. So I think we lived for 30 years of a kind of progressive wave in Latin America. I mean, we had the new constitutions, we had indigenous rights, we had the civil rights, like the 1988 constitution in Brazil was named this constitution of rights. So for these 30 years, these right conservative people were trying to find out ways of answering to this and of like creating an opposition to this. And I think that in the last 2 or 3 years they finally made it. And because of many things, because of an exhaustion of the model that in Brazil the left wing got into office, and I think we should discuss more of it. It's very complicated, but we kind of need to go through it more a little bit sometime. But beyond this, I think these guys, they know their economical agenda, which is still the neoliberal agenda from the 1990s. They would not have popular support. They would not go back to office without by elections. That's why they needed the coup. They wouldn't be there to implement this agenda through the ballots. So, and they in some point, at some point, they realized that the conservative discourse, on the other hand, was reaching more and more people. And that's where I think the evangelical church is not something to be left out of our analysis. Because that's a channel where this conservative, non-progressive, non-liberal ideas was slowly being disputed. And I mean, I go to these rural areas every time, and we used to see one big Catholic church. And now we go to the same cities, and there are 3 or 4 small evangelical churches. My parents live in a outskirts of São Paulo, and I can't count how many new churches I see in their neighborhoods every time I go there. And while we were doing other things, and like the left was trying to arrange, like to work on a higher level of social policies, and sometimes even trying to finally go to areas that even the left-wing governments didn't go. And I think, well, we know that racial inequalities and the incarceration of black people was never addressed in this country. So we were kind of trying to push things from one side, and then these guys were slowly, and I don't know to what extent they were like actually conspiring. Yeah, I have trouble with conspiring theories, but in this case, sometimes I think that we need a conspiring theory to help us understand how is it that this and these ideas, this conservative ideas, they were there, but I think on this process of 20 years, these ideas were not. It was not easy to come up with these ideas at many places. We kind of created a wave of progressive. And in 2012, what happened was that it was broken in a way. Like we always joke that the pressure coup was open. Like these ideas were there, and then people were not ashamed of talking about it. People were not ashamed of being quotes, how do you call them to say that? Like
anti-quotas, anti-affirmative action.
Yeah, anti-affirmative action. People are not afraid of saying there were anti-sexuality, different expressions, and then all these things came out. And so I think there's manipulation, but there's also a shift that has been going on for longer than we kind of noticed. And that has
open room for this for these ideas to come up. So that's why I think like they've been going so much over this comportment and behavior things, and they kind of the culture work like in a way that we weren't expecting. I think maybe we had this conversation. You say you were expecting because you had been living with this for longer, but many of other people were not seeing it coming. So yeah, I have been struggling with these ideas, and I think there are some pieces missing there, many pieces missing there, but trying to summarize, I think the gender and sexuality issues are so central because that's the way they found to have new friends, which they wouldn't have to their economical ideas.
Good. Thank you. Thank you all. And right, and